Chapter 32. Slade, still keeping a close tab on his prey, noticed that Collins had just started down the rise, apparently making for the old mining town. Stowing away the telescope, Slade swung up on the saddle, nudged his horse forward, and started after Collins before he could make the town's outskirts. The ranger planned to see where Collins would bed down for the night, and then, come morning, he'd make his move. But owing to the nature of his job, plans hardly ever turn out the way he'd hoped, just like tonight. Now, with the light of the silver moon, Slade had to be extra careful he didn't expose himself to his quarry. Halfway into the town, he dismounted and walked his horse to an outcropping of bush, hidden from view and from the remaining structures in a rundown hotel directly to his front. Just as he lay to wait, he made out Collins heading for the hotel. He'd made good time. Leaving his horse to graze, Slade removed his spurs, tied them together, and placed them on the saddle horn and walked into town, slowly, making his way toward one of the structures, a mercantile store boarded up on the same side of the hotel. He went inside and prepared to wait till morning. Ben Collins dismounted and tied his horse on the hitching post. He removed saddlebags and his Winchester, then stepping onto its boardwalk, he entered the hotel. There were no doors left on its hinges to open as he strolled in. Dust floated everywhere. But he found a spot just behind the front desk, reasonably clean, and a good place to lie down in. After unrolling his bedspread, he heard loud hoofbeats coming from the opposite side of town. By the sound of it, there were two riders. "Reckon whoever was doing the tracking just found me," he muttered. Slowly, drawing his gun, Collins angled over towards the front, facing the street. Then, standing by a window, he could make out the riders galloping into the center of town, reining in their horses in front of the hotel. They ain't lawmen, bounty hunters by the look of 'em, he guessed. One of the riders, Kenneth Jones, dismounted and drew his gun. As he glanced over at the second rider, Jonathan Snyder, staying mounted, who drew his Winchester, levered around, and fingered the trigger, ready to fire at a moment's notice. "Collins! Ben Collins!" Jones yelled. "Been tracking you going on a month now. There'd be two of us, so come on out with your hands in the air." "And if I don't," Collins yelled out. "We'll shoot your horse first," Snyder blurted out. "Then you, and take you back to Austin." "You boys bounty hunters?" Collins asked. "That's right," said Snyder as he glanced quickly up and down the dusty street as a pair of tumbleweeds blew gently across the dust-covered street, then back to the hotel. "So come out peacefully," Snyder said, chuckling under his breath. But Collins, he had other plans. "Okay, I'm coming out," he said. In the meantime, Slade, edging forward cautiously, had worked his way around the back alleyway before the first shot rang out. Drawing his gun and thumbing back the hammer, he'd made it around the back of the hotel just as the first shot from Collins' gun split the quiet night. Keeping himself in the shadows as best he could, Slade noticed the open back door. Taking full advantage, he stayed close to the door jamb, made his way inside, just as a second gunshot rang out. Slade just made out Collins' figure by the window slightly in the shadows, but bolted for cover as shots hit left and right of him from the outside. Then, hearing the exchange between the two remaining men, Slade stood his ground and waited for the outcome. Kenneth Jones felt it then, and he swallowed hard. It was do-or-die time as he nervously thumbed over the hammer of his gun, checking up and down the street, watching, waiting as if expecting a crowd to gather. Suddenly, a shot from Collins' gun rang out from inside the hotel, slamming Kenneth Jones backwards, killing him before he even hit the ground. His gun flew from his hand. A second shot grazed Snyder's hat as he fired slug after slug into the hotel, while at the same time dismounting, running to the side of the building as he discarded the rifle for his handgun. "You're a dead man, Collins!" Snyder shouted with his back up against the hotel wall. Now Collins knew where the bounty hunter was by the sound of his voice. Figured he had a pretty good chance at taking him out. "Where have I heard that before?" Collins said. Suddenly, Collins ran out through the front of the hotel, jumped into the air head first, and before he landed on his side on the boardwalk, he squeezed off two shots in the general direction of his would-be killer. Snyder turned towards the hurtling human body and yelled, "What the?" They were his last words. It had been a bold stroke, but it paid off, for just before Snyder knew what was happening, a round hit him, almost center mass, inches away from his heart. He staggered once, falling on his knees, clutching his chest as his gun dropped away from his dead fingers. The second shot grazed his forehead. Ben Collins picked himself up, dusted his shirt, walked over to the bounty hunter's body while holstering his gun. He then slowly walked back into the hotel. Then from inside the hotel door, Collins walked right into John Slade's gun being pointed at his chest. Collins figured he only had one thing he could do. He raised his hands over his head. "Slowly now," Slade said with an edge of menace to his voice. "Reach your gun, pull it out by the handle, and drop it on the ground." Collins smiled, studied the stranger's expression for just a moment before slowly reaching down, pulling out his Colt, and letting it drop to the ground with a thud. "You another bounty hunter?" Collins asked. "Well, if I was, you'd be dead." "Nope, name's Slade, John Slade, Texas Ranger." "I'll be. I think I've heard of you. You were down at the Nueces Strip, wasn't you?" "Well, reckon that'd be me, all right," Slade said. "Come on ahead. Nothing funny, mind. Wouldn't want to kill you." Slade slowly pulled off to his right, letting Collins walk forward, still with his gun trained on his prisoner. "So, reckon you'd be taking me in?" Collins said as he walked into the center of the hotel's lobby, stopped, turned facing the lawman. Slade offered him a crooked smile. "Reckon so," he said. "You can drop your hands, but keep 'em where I can see 'em." "Well, thank you, Ranger. Now what?" "Well, why don't you grab one of them overturned chairs? Set it in front of me. Have a seat," Slade commanded. Collins obeyed. Collins moved to the chair lying over on its side in a corner by the front window. He blew the dust off it, set it upright, brought it over, and sat down with his hands in plain sight facing the Ranger. "Okay, now what?" Collins snarled, glaring at his captor. Slade sighed but didn't say anything. Then, just as Ben Collins sat on his chair, Slade cautiously moved a few steps to his rear. He slowly turned, pulled a chair directly from his right rear side. A few feet from Collins, he sat and leaned back in the hard chair, placing his gun on his lap, folding his arms, and dropping his guard just a little. "Well, now it seems we have quite a But Slade never finished his sentence. Collins' eyebrows went up slightly, seeing his chance, just a chance, mind, to catch the Ranger off guard. He timed it, just as Slade placed his gun on his lap, folding his arms. Collins suddenly jumped to his feet, grabbed the chair, and flung it at the Ranger. But Slade saw movement the moment he folded his arms about his chest. Bad move on his part. He nearly paid the price for that dumb oversight. "Oh, shit," Slade breathed. Did Collins think he'd be still sitting? The thought raced through his mind. He was wrong. Slade bounded out of his seat and quickly grasped his gun, but just at that same instant, the flung chair struck his gun hand, knocking it away from him. Collins' timing was impeccable. By that point, Collins was still moving as he ran and jumped the Ranger. Slade attempted to spin away, but it was too late. They crashed onto the floor as dust swirled around them. For 8 noisy seconds they rolled, each trying to gain the upper hand, both grunting as they elbowed each other about their bodies and faces. With blood spurting from around his open mouth, Slade and his opponent finally got back onto their feet. Blood oozed out of Collins's mouth and eyes as well as he spit out a tooth, breathing hard. Collins looked over the floor trying to find Slade's gun, but suddenly, Slade, with knees bent, propelled himself at his foe, once again colliding and trading blows. Amid the shattered tables and chairs, each giving and receiving heartfelt blows. Collins received the worst of them, and steadily he was being driven backwards to the opposite wall. But Slade was tiring. Collins saw his chance. He swung harder, but he too started wearing himself out with each blow he connected or Slade parried. Then Slade, finally seeing an opening, struck Collins a hard blow that landed right between his eyes. Seeing Collins's face snap upwards, he thrust an uppercut to his jaw, stopping him dead in his tracks. as he was flung up against a wall, his useless arms dropping to his sides. Slade stepped back a step or two, saw Collins' eyes roll up into his head, wobbled on unsteady legs, and crumpled to the hard wooden planks of the hotel lobby's floor, unconscious. Slade swiped at his bloodied lips. Breathing hard, he bent his knees, leaned over and placed his hands on them, trying to get his breathing under control. Once he'd regulated his breathing, he walked out to Collins' horse, pulled down his lasso, and went back inside. Collins' body had rolled onto its left side, still out of it, as Slade tied his hands behind him and his legs together. After a few minutes' rest, Slade went to find his horse, rode back to the hotel, tying it next to Collins' mount. He pulled his saddlebags and bedroll and walked back into the hotel for a good night's sleep. Texas Ranger John Slade stood in the hotel's lobby for a long time, watching Ben Collins' inert body. Then, very slowly, he walked to the opposite wall, feeling the pains of the hard blows he'd received. Spreading out his bedroll, he laid his tired body and began to contemplate Collins' next day or two as he rode back to Austin with his prisoner. Outside the hotel, a thin mist enfolded. A light rain fell for several minutes. Then flashes of lightning could be seen over the mountains, followed by rolls of thunder, cracking the still quiet darkness of the night. It sent a potent portent to John Slade of violent events that may soon await him. A frown crossed the lawman's face. He shuddered. "If I didn't know any better, I'm sure someone just walked over my grave," Slade muttered.